Alright, so let's go ahead and talk about some mental concepts within the game of poker, specifically within No Limit Hold'em, a thought process or a mental process for thinking about a hand as it is occurring, hands that get executed over and over and over, and a basic approach to go ahead and prevent yourself from autopiloting, going ahead and kind of falling asleep behind the wheel, and really just kind of paying more attention and having a much stronger mental focus on the game while you're playing it. I think this is a great video to watch at the beginning of your sessions. I think it's great to watch in between, and certainly will not hurt at any point in time to go ahead and review. Now, the actual content here, just as a very quick preface, is not originally my own. Let's go ahead and bring this over into view here. The content primarily comes from the website checkshovepoker.com. Specifically, they're the founder of the site, the company, Hunter Sitchi, who is a poker player himself, investor, entrepreneur, all those kind of things. Actually, an author here. I'll kind of show that in a second. Really came up with this over the course of his play and development, and shares it with his students. He shared it with me in some coaching sessions long ago, and has further since refined and built it out. So checkshovepoker.com is definitely one place you can go ahead and look for some more content on this. Just go ahead and bring this out here. So this is his actual site, definitely worth a visit. And then he will also be publishing a book in 2017 on June 1st, and definitely worth putting in a pre-order. So I have mine in there as well too. So really happy and really looking forward to that. So that being said, let's go ahead and just kind of dive right in and take a look at the template and kind of run down through here. So the software that I'm using actually is called Xmind. It is a mind mapping piece of software. It allows you to create a whole series of charts, organizational trees, so on and so forth. It's just a great way to take topics and organize and structure them out in a multitude of ways. This particular one is more kind of an organizational tree kind of chart, where we have a central topic, which is our template. Now we have a pre-flop concept and then a post-flop concept, and we'll just spend the time, work our way down the tree, and start talking through things, and then also go ahead and as we're talking through it, nuance the topics and the subject matter a little bit, how towards PO Solver as a tool. That's the most common one that I use. Can be integrated as well too. Some sections will go pretty quick, some sections are a little heavier in text, but I think the text heavy ones are definitely worth talking through. So let's dive in. So we have our template here, and we're going to go ahead and talk about preflop scenarios. So we have an abstract. So let's go ahead and just kind of maneuver down our list, and we'll talk about our abstract. So within our abstract, preflop attention is an absolute must. So this is not something where you want to be on your headphones, distracted, involved in other things. And really, the main component here, I'll go ahead and just leave the mouse cursor at the top. Big river decisions can come down to determining if a hand is on their range. So big river decisions, large bet, thinking exactly in the case of No Limit Hold'em, you call off a bet, raise a bet, whatever the case may be. You really have to determine if an exact hand, for the purposes of your hand rating, is within their range. Is it one of the possible ones that they can have? And if you're just missing so much information, you will be at a disadvantage to go ahead and actually come down and make the best decision that you can. So that's just a little bit about the abstract. Preflop attention and big river decisions come down to determining how attention and those two kind of concepts relate. Now this next section has quite a bit of text, but I think it's also really good from a high level standpoint. In fact, I think this probably could even move out of preflop into its own. But we're talking about centers of profitability. So let's go ahead and talk about this here. So there really are 4 centers of profitability with a summary component here as well. So we have card edge, skill edge, position, and then initiative. So let's talk about card edge. Card edge is certainly the easiest way for you to create a profitable situation. Simply playing better hands than your opponent is often all you need to make money. If you take that a step further, you will learn to identify range versus range advantages. There are only 3 possible outcomes. Either your range has an equity advantage, your opponent's range have an equity advantage, or neither range has an equity advantage. If your range is either neutral or at a disadvantage, you need to take a look at the other 3 ways to create profitable situations in order to see if your hand is playable. So I think the main concept here is there's certainly an edge in playing cards, tighter ranges versus wider ranges, and the ability or the skill set that you're looking to develop over time is to really identify range versus range, where the advantage is, where the disadvantage is, and then using these other components of profitability, or these other centers of profitability, to see if your hand is playable and can make money for you. So let's go ahead and just scroll down here, and we'll go down to skill edge is our next one. So we're talking about skill edge. This is the edge that is most often difficult to quantify, but can also be the most valuable. Obviously, if you are significantly better than your opponent, you can often overcome minor range disadvantages. But how much so? How many more hands can you play profitably? It's difficult to say. Your ability to identify this edge by seeing flaws in your opponent's game is crucial as you move forward with the hand. You can identify these flaws and execute with this information. You can probably create a profitable situation here. So when it comes to skill edge, I think the work that's being done, or the work that I'm doing with PO Solver, I think is a large component of this. You go ahead and see what is an equilibrium, what does an optimal line of play look like, so on and so forth. And then you can see, is your opponent or your series of opponents going ahead and playing within those lines, or they're playing outside those lines, basically where are they at? And that's where you'll be able to start to see what are the flaws within their game. Now, the ability to identify this edge is critical as you move forward. I think that's true. And then you can identify these flaws and execute with this information. You can probably create a profitable situation. I think probably is really a great or a key word there. Just because you see the edge and know that it exists, you probably can create it. But again, it does center around the language of probable. It's not a given just because you see a flaw in their game that you automatically will go ahead and be rewarded in terms of profit by exploiting it. So it is very very selective there. So I think that covers the skill edge reasonably well enough. Let's go ahead and scroll down here. We'll go down a little bit further. We'll talk about position. Okay, position is very important in No Limit Hold'em. If I had to guess, I would say it adds 4 to 16% worth of extra equity to your range depending on opponents and stack size. Being able to see bet the flop to buy your opponent's equity is crucial, just as it's important to be able to check behind and control the size of the pot. Consequently, position can often swing the balance in your favor, especially if you know how to wield your skill edge. And I think this wording of this language here is just 100% dead on. In fact, even the work with PO Solver, when we talk about look at our aggregate analyses, I would say that this number right here is definitely very close to what we're seeing there, but we can often see in those aggregation reports, if you watched those other recordings that I've done, there is very simply an equity edge, there's an equity realization edge, there's an EV edge that comes from position, but it is consequently highly valuable. And again, swing the balance in your favor, especially if you know how to wield your skill edge. So the skill edge and position, I think obviously those two will definitely play hand in hand. So I think that's good on position. Let's talk about initiative. Scroll down here just a little bit. Being the last pre-flop aggressor has many advantages. Your range can often be weaker than your opponent's as long as you're the aggressor. The initiative you took pre-flop will assist you in representing stronger hands post-flop. In turn, this creates extra fold equity for you and adds value to speculative hands. This is especially true if you know how to use it in unison with your positional edge. So we can kind of see these concepts are building on top of one another. Utilizing initiative, especially where you have a positional edge, consequently that builds upon a skill edge, so on and so forth. So I think that's where we talked in a prior section here when it kind of reviewed. Card edge is one of the easiest way to create profitability, but if you do take your time, spend it in the lab to develop your skill edge, you do maintain position, you do leverage initiative. These three components over here can probably create a profitable situation, profitable scenario, vice a stronger card edge. But again, it still does center around probably, and I think in many cases. So let's go ahead and talk about the summary for just this quick section here. And I think maybe I kind of covered a couple of concepts in here already, but we start off, card edge is definitely the most important pre-flop edge. Like I said, playing better hands of your opponent is the easiest way to make money. If you don't have a card edge, it's important to consider the other ways to create value. For instance, if you have position, initiative, and skill edge, this will usually overcome all but the strongest range disadvantages. The point where the lines begin to blur is when you have two non-card edge advantages. What if you only have position and initiative? What about your position and skill edge? What about a skill edge and initiative? These are often the most difficult situations to quantify. And I think that's especially true, and I think we'll see that with further work that we continue to do with PO. Card edge is so significant, such a meaningful factor in profitability, and when you start to only have two of the four concepts working in your favor, the lines begin to blur, becomes difficult to quantify, and it just becomes harder to play. So I think that this states it very well. Card edge, the most important, and then you also go ahead and I'll just go scroll up here to make sure I review this correctly. You go ahead and have a skill edge, a position, initiative, and when you don't have a card edge, you really want to have these three working in unison together with you. And then from there, if there are situations where you only have, for example, position, initiative, but not a skill edge, or skill edge, position, not initiative, when these three components start to break down, the lines do begin to blur and simply becomes harder scenarios to go ahead and play. So I think that covers it up pretty good. And again, those are the four centers of profitability. Just say it one last time. Card edge, the most important, skill edge, position, initiative. Okay. Great. So let me just go ahead and kind of close this back up and grab a little screen real estate. We'll move on here to the next topics. Are going to be steps. So the steps in the thought process preflop is we have my opening range. So what is my opening range in this spot? The next thing we need to consider is how do people perceive my opening range? And then correspondingly, when we're thinking about ranges, as a result, what does that make? What does that make their range? So kind of talking this through there, when we're in a given spot or given situation, we should have a fairly defined or fairly rudimentary opening range or a series of hands. We need to take into account how people perceive my opening range. So tight, loose, aggressive, passive. Those are all concepts, or could be perceptions. Perhaps there are other ways that they perceive them. And then as a result, what does that make their range? So that's also important to react, or important to think about. Do they make any sort of adjustments in their range at all? And consequently, they might not. You may just have a player who, we just finished the last section about centers of profitability. You may have a player that is just only going to play high cards for high card value. Alternately, you may have other players that will make some sort of adjustments, so on and so forth. But I think these are kind of the big three concepts. What is be mindful of what my opening range is in a given spot. Be aware of how people perceive my opening range, and if they are a thinking player, as a result, what does that make their range? So those are going to be the big three steps here in preflop. Now we have a section here, or a bullet point, preflop folds to me, so we'll talk about this. So preflop, and it folds to me, where am I at in relation to the button? What are effective stacks? And then what are the optimal hands for me to open? So again, this goes back to where I am in relation to the button. So where's my position? What are the effective stacks? How much money are we playing for? And then what are the optimal hands for me to open in this exact spot? Now, when it comes to the optimal hands to open, there are a couple concepts here. Do I have incentive to change my opening range? Do I have incentive to change opening size? And then consequently, the last one here, how do I respond to 3-bets? So do I have any incentive to change my opening range? Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. I think that, again, that's very situational, and that also links back to the skill edge and the work that we do in with PO Solver. Opening size, and again, I think those two go hand in hand. The range of cards that we go ahead and open with. Also, consequently, do we change the opening size by any factors, smaller, bigger, larger, double, triple, whatever, so on and so forth. And then how do I respond to 3-bet? So I want to get 3-bet, what is my 3-bet response? Even prior to recording this, I have another video that went ahead and published on this YouTube channel and website for how we're responding to 3-bet. So we should have kind of a basic strategy of how we go ahead and respond, and PO Software has done a great job to help us define that out. So, and again, preflop, when it folds to me, where am I at with relation to the button? What are effective stack sizes? What are optimal hands for me to open? Do I have any incentive to change opening ranges? Do I have any incentive to change opening sizes? And then finally, how do I respond to 3-bets? So, okay, let's talk about the next section here. We'll go back through. This is the last major topic under preflop. Preflop limps to me, and again, the thought process here is where I'm at in relation to the button, what are the effective stacks, and how many people have limped. And then we have a section here for about the limpers. Do they limp call or limp fold? Are their ranges elastic or inelastic? Do they tend to limp raise? So talking through this a little bit, do they limp call or limp fold? So is a spot where you can go ahead and put out a bet knowing that they'll call with the majority of the hands that they would limp with. So can you build a pot? Are ranges elastic or inelastic? So if you do go ahead and decide to open, do they make any sort of adjustment with their ranges, or are they very simply looking to say, this is a hand I want to go ahead and see a flop with, almost regardless of the price, or what does it take? This might also relate a little bit to, do you have any incentive to change your sizes? You could go ahead and, if you have a lot of limpers, size them out, so on and so forth, size to include. So I think there are some strategies there to really think about. And then do they tend to limp raise? Are they somebody that, you put the bet out and then they would raise to a cap on the game, to a larger size, so on and so forth. So I think you need to be aware of how those players will go ahead and react. So the next section here, the next bullet point, has a couple spots here, taking actions. And in terms of taking action when the preflop limps to me, do I have any incentive to change my isolation ranges and sizing? What will I do if I get 3-bet or limped raise? Do I have any incentive to go ahead and overlimp? And I think we kind of talked about just talking about the limpers and kind of talking through that process a little bit. Cover these concepts as well too. Do I have any incentive to change my isolation range and sizing? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Build a pot, let them call. I think those are situational, but it is a thought process to think about. What will I do if I get 3-bet or limped raise? And again, we have some basic strategies published for how we think about those exact spots. And then do I have any incentive to overlimp? Is there any incentive to go ahead and just put the limp in the pot and let the hand continue on? Sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't. But again, those are the situations to be very mindful, very, very thoughtful about. So let's close that up. So I think that does that for the preflop. So, and again, just kind of talking through this one more time, we have an abstract where preflop attention is a must. Big river decisions often comes down to that. We have centers of profitability, which are going to be card edge, skill edge, position, and then initiative. Card edge is going to be the biggest of the four and carry most of the weight. If I had to go ahead and take a guess, I'd probably say, or put in a number on that, I'd probably say about 80%. If you have to break these four concepts down into a 100% pool, 80%, I think that's pretty fair. Might be closer to say 70, that way you get 10% skill, 10% position, 10% initiative, but 70-80% is really going to be your card edge. And then finally, skill edge, position, initiative are going to add up to be a third, a quarter of the remaining 100% for how you are generally profitable in a game. So there's that. We're going through talking about steps. Your steps are going to be my opening ranges, the perception of that range, and as a result, even if they are a thinking player, what does that make their range? When preflop folds to me, again, you're really thinking about here relation to the button, effective stacks, optimal hands for me to open. Correspondingly, is there any incentive to change or make any sort of adjustments? And then when it limps, again, it's really the same concepts. Where am I at in relation to the button? What are effective stacks and how many people have limped? About the limpers, and then finally taking action. I think those concepts are pretty simple. So I think these are all great concepts to keep in mind preflop, and going ahead and listening to this recording multiple times, hopefully, or over the course of time, taking time to revisit, you can take these thought processes and make them points of consideration when you are playing preflop. So let's go down here and we'll talk about post-flop. The post-flop has 6 points, and post-flop can just be on the flop, but then also I think these concepts go towards turn and river, and I think this section goes here pretty quick. So we'll talk through it here. So the first one here is who has a range advantage. Now typically this will be the player in position with initiative, and let's take a look at the subpoints here. So in looking at these subpoints here, we need to consider the following here. So who has the most equity on the flop? Whose range is uncapped? Whose range has the most pairs? So we need to think about that. It could be us, it could be them, and basically decide, where these range advantages do exist. Now, when thinking about what is my range here, we can start asking ourselves the question, how many bluffs can my range support? Is the opponent folding often enough for my bluffs to be profitable? Can I defend against check raises? And is my checking range well protected? Do checks include strong hands to balance the weaker ones to the correct ratio? So again, one thing about my range, how many bluffs can my range support? Is my opponent folding often enough for my bluffs to be profitable? Can I defend against check raises? And then finally, is my checking range well protected? Do checks include strong hands to balance the weaker ones to the correct ratio? So I think this is where the work with PO Solver comes in, and also development of the skill edge from the centers of profitability. We will start to identify the spots where we can say this is a correct ratio, this isn't, this person is out of line, I'm out of line, so on and so forth. But these are the main concepts to see who has range advantage. So who has the most equity, who is uncapped, who has the most pairs. My range, how many bluffs can my range support? Is the opponent folding often enough for my bluffs to be profitable? Can I defend against check raises? And then finally, is my check range well protected? The next one here, what type of board is this? There's no real subpoints on this that's recorded here, but this is actually where those aggregation reports, I think, in PO Solver become extremely helpful. Is it ace high, king high, jack high, some sort of broad white? Is it connected? Is it suited? Is there flush draw? Is it monotone? We really can do the deep dive analysis. A lot of our work in PO really goes into this bullet point here. So even though there's no points here, the more that we record and develop and define with PO, I think really fits under this bullet point here, and then also sprinkles across all of these others as well in terms of building out a robust skill set and understanding of the game of poker. So let's go on here to the next one, in position. In position, we ask ourselves, number 3, what am I trying to accomplish here? So if you're going to bet, there are reasons to bet, and we'll talk about these reasons. You're going to be betting for value. You're going to be betting as a bluff or semi-bluff, and then to buy up equity. So these talk about these concepts a little bit further. For value, value is value, and you're just going to get more money in the pot so that it comes back to you. As a bluff or semi-bluff, sometimes you do have just a naked bluff, but it could be a good spot to bluff. You could be semi-bluffing, where you have a hand that could find a way to improve on a later street. And then finally, perhaps more so in a multi-way spot, you're making a bet to push their hands out such that you'll buy up any equity that they had against you. So you may be in a spot where you have top pair but a marginal kicker, and you're looking to buy up equity from a player that may have 2 overcards and has very good equity against you. So you can buy that up. So those are going to be the reasons to bet. If we cannot accomplish those 3 things, then checking is the right place. So if we can't bet for value, or as a profitable bluff or semi-bluff, or in an instance to buy equity, then checking is going to be the right play. So that's going to be talking about position and what we're trying to accomplish in position. Out of position, typically you'll be facing a bet, and you need to ask yourself, what is his range? And then finally, what is my range, or what should my range be? We can go ahead and base the decision based upon pot odds, so we can just take a straight pot odds calculation and decide, is this something that we should go forward with? And then finally, how well I think my opponent plays post-flop. So we can base my range or what it should be. We can base our calling, raising, so on and so forth. We need to take a look at pot odds, and then we also need to think about how well the opponent plays post-flop as well too. So are there any post-flop skill edge considerations about our opponent that we should go ahead and be making in that exact spot or in that exact time? So those are going to be the concepts for out of position typically when facing a bet. We're going to be talking about number 5 here, and we just have one more to go. Out of position when opponent bets, you need to ask yourself the following. What are the pot odds? Is going to be first. The second is going to be having a thought process about minimum defense frequency, and then finally, if getting correct pot odds and you do have implied odds, then call. There's a sub point here to that last one. Otherwise, you'll be folding or potentially check raising. If we are check raising, the flop must have the correct components, and those components are: the flop in range must have enough nutted value combos, and have enough semi-bluffs to support those combos. And I think this is where PO Solver does a really good job, because it will go ahead and break down the range construction in a way to say, these are the value hands that we go ahead and bluff with, or these are the value hands that we go ahead and check raise with, and then there's also a balance component where there will be certain bluffs in there. Bluffs or semi-bluffs. Really, we should focus on the semi-bluff concept. Never really throwing a naked bluff out there with no chance to improve, but a semi-bluff should go ahead and be able to find ways to improve there as well too. So I think that's some pretty important concepts. So let me see if I can get this all on the screen here at one shot and read through this one more time. Out of position, and the opponent bets, you need to ask yourself, what are the pot odds? Minimum defense frequency, and I guess I can just talk about this for a split second. You just want to consider, is my opponent betting in a manner or situation or spot where he is being profitable just by betting with any two cards? So are you defending at a point that is sufficient? Are you defending your hands enough so that they cannot be profitable with any two cards and going ahead and betting here? So there's a lot of things that are written about minimum defense frequency. There's an equation for it. You can go ahead, and I think some Googling on the internet, we'll go ahead, or some looking up the term will show you a bit more about it, but that's also a fairly important one as well too. Not something to get into in this exact moment, but if it does go ahead and stoke your thought processes, definitely worth looking at. Finally here, out of position, you need to ask yourself the final element: if getting correct pot odds and implied odds exist, then call. Otherwise, you're going to be folding or check raising. If you're check raising, the flop must have the right components. Flop and range must have enough nutted value combos that exist, and must have enough semi-bluffs to support those combos. So this is really just saying, if we are going to be check raising, we need to be balanced in this spot, or we should be balanced in this spot, to where the range and the hands can support a nutted value, and then correspondingly semi-bluffs in these spots can also be check raised as well too, with the opportunity to go ahead and improve. So we have the last item here. We'll just go down to this. Ask yourself, the final step here, does my opponent even consider my range? And this is totally possible. What does my range look like to him? Is it tight? Is it wide? 3-bet too much, or 3-bet too little? So if the opponent doesn't even consider your range, I think you can just play it really more in an ABC poker kind of scenario, where more of a mathematical or foundational approach can go ahead and be taken there. Likewise, if your opponent does consider your range, you need to think about, what does it look like to him, tight or wide, and then 3-betting, does it occur too much or too little, and then take these concepts appropriately forward in your internal situational type of analysis there. And again, I think this is where PO Solver really becomes important, because you get a good perspective of range construction as the hand develops or continues out in a post-flop scenario. We go ahead and see kind of how the range of hands will narrow themselves down over a series of time. You start to lose combos because you would be checking, calling, betting, so on and so forth. So if they even consider this, and a lot of players don't even consider your range, so you don't need to play them in a way that they do. You can just play more kind of a ABC straightforward kind of perspective there, I think is one way to handle that. So that's our internal kind of in-game thought process here as we're talking about the game of Hold'em, playing poker. Hopefully this has been valuable or helpful. Definitely a few minutes worth of recording here, so feel free to bookmark it, listen to this anytime. I think this is a pretty reasonable recording to go ahead and listen to when you start your sessions. Begin off. If you go ahead and find yourself having difficulty mid-session, this is also something worth listening to. And best of luck, and if there's any thoughts, comments, please let me know.